Okay. Prologue. They told me that he was dead, and I didn't believe it. I said, no, he can't be. The people still read. Print cannot be dead. And oh, and a voice in my head repeated every word I said. So I said, print cannot be dead. There's some way that we can let people know that books are important because with you can read on a computer, you can read on your phone, but a book becomes yours. People say, I'm going to read my book. And it's not a book you wrote, but it becomes so close to you that it's your book for that duration of time that you're in love turning those pages. It is your book. And sometimes it helps to keep my life from being a game show. And welcome to Right to Speak.
Hi, guys.
Hi, guys. I'm Brianna Gravant.
And I'm Benny Rizzuti, apparently. That's me tonight. In a dress. He likes to dress. I like to dress in dresses.
I have, and it was not even a secret. It was.
I'm going to start calling you J. Edgar instead. What do you think?
It's fine.
Yeah?
Yeah.
No, I think I'll stick with Benny.
When I worked
or Pellegrino.
Pellegrino, yeah.
All right, so tonight we're going to talk about influences.
Yes.
And we're going to talk about inspiration. And we're going to talk a lot about writing.
Okay, and I'm going to take my glasses off.
Are you going to take?
You're going to look like a mosquito with them on.
No, I think you look great with your glasses
do?
on. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but I mean,
know.
if you feel more comfortable, can you see with your glasses off?
No, I'll have to put them back on when I want to see. But also, this gives me a chance to ask the audience, what you think, how I look, because the one problem is it's only Brianna and myself, and so if you leave messages on Facebook Live, we're not being rude that we can't get to them. We don't want to try to read the message while we're doing the show.
Exactly. It doesn't come up on a prompt in front of us or anything else like that. So if you guys want to mention anything or to make any comments, we'll happily, halfway through the show, we'll check through and we'll answer whatever we can. And we'll also answer back on Facebook with you guys after the show is complete.
Okay, and like halfway through the show, we have a little cartoon we can show.
Exactly.
Yeah, so we'll show that and we can.
And what's important for you to see what we look like is because we're also interested in promoting Right to Speak through bookmarks. And Benny had this fabulous idea because, as much as he said print might be dead, he still believes in libraries and he still believes in bookstores and places where people go to read.
Yes, and I feel that we should keep them alive. We should keep the libraries because now what helps libraries is that there are DVDs, there are...
but that's not important.
Right.
It doesn't matter if there's DVDs. What we want, no, you can't put a bookmark in a DVD.
Right,
So
exactly.
we would like to know if you'd like to see our mugs on a bookmark that you can put in the middle of a book that you are in love with.
Yes.
That's your book and no one else's, even if you borrow it from the library.
Isn't that so true, though? It becomes your... You say, I'm reading my book, and like with me, because I like to write, people are like, oh, you're writing something else? I'm saying, no, I'm reading... I'm reading Mosaic.
Yes, and so but it's funny because when I talk about my book, it's like it's the detachment of, the artist. It's about the you write a book and then you're like, okay, what's next? What do I get to do next?
Yeah.
So tonight we wanted to talk about inspiration and influence.
Inspiration and influence.
Yes.
So we'll start with the influence.
Okay.
First. Do you want to talk about your influence?
No, I want to know about you.
About me?
Yes,
okay.
absolutely.
All right. I'd say my first influences in writers, and was from television. It was from the Twilight Zone show when I was young.
Okay.
And Rod Serling was a writer but a celebrity.
Okay.
So when I was young, I loved the show, and then I saw there were books I could get on Twilight Zone books with the shorts. Twilight Zone, for those of you who don't know, was primarily three authors. And it was Rod Serling, it was Charles Beaumont, and Richard Matheson.
Really?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's primarily three of them, and some of the stories they didn't write, so they wrote teleplays. So they do a Ray Bradbury story, I Sing the Body Electric.
Yes.
So they did the teleplay, though. Ray Bradbury didn't do it. And
Which
and,
he lifted from Whitman anyway.
Well, the poem.
Yes,
yeah,
yes,
the
yes,
poem.
yes.
I sing the
Which
body.
is actually about slavery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But his I Sing the Body Electric, his story, Ray Bradbury, who was a major influence to me. Ray Bradbury's story is about these robotic android grandmothers.
Right.
And
But
you-
how did it influence you? So we
All right.
if you wanted to watch the Twilight
I
Zone.
realized that Twilight Zone stories were stories I really liked.
Okay.
I started to read them. I used to also read comic books.
Okay.
And I was a big DC comic. And
What was your favorite? What was your favorite DC comic?
Challenges of the Unknown was one of them that you probably never heard of.
I've never heard of, but you brought it
which
in.
is-
How awesome
I
is
brought
this?
in. They're always trying to bring the challenges. We can't do a close up, but they're always trying to bring them back.
No, we need to get Josh Brolin and Ryan Reynolds to be doing this instead of Deadpool.
Yeah. So, but this is DC, and my son got this for me because he knows I'm a fan of both of Challenges of the Unknown and Dead Man.
Okay.
And it's a reboot, so they rebooted it. But Challenges of the Unknown was a Jack Kirby, who Jack Kirby created many of the really very famous Marvel guys.
Right. So that influenced you in which way? So like you read
So
the
the
comics,
stories-
you watched
the-
the Twilight
yeah.
Zone, and
And-
what was it about those books and those comics and those television shows that really impacted you and said, no, this is something that I want to do?
They were great stories. The stories themselves interested me. And DC Comics and Marvel, DC is more of a writer-oriented comic. It was back
Okay.
then. And Marvel was more of just, they made the artwork and then you wrote the story around that.
Okay.
So, at Twilight Zone, they were great stories. They were really, it's 30-minute show, but it was about 20-minute episode. The first minute of Twilight Zone, and Rod Serling's stories as well, in the first few sentences or first paragraph, you know where you're going. You have a good idea.
So
where
what?
you're-
So there's people that are watching our show that have watched the Twilight Zone. So like I think that what they're curious about, and what I'm most curious about as someone that has watched the Twilight Zone,
Right.
is how did that influence you? What was it? What was it about
Those
the first
stories
line,
had-
the first? You know, what was it that caught your attention so much that you thought, man, I would love to have my hand at this.
Okay, these stories were what was great. They were like speculative fiction. They were
Right.
science fiction, and they had twist endings. They were very very involved. Sometimes the story was very more complicated than it appeared to
Right.
be. So I love these stories, and when I was young, I loved them. And then in 7th grade, I had a teacher, Mrs. Record. I don't remember her first name, Mrs. Record, and she would read stories like that. She would read stories of Rod Serling and different suspense and science fiction type of stories, and she would not read the ending.
Okay.
And then what she did, and it was a writer's exercise, I didn't even realize it, she would not give us the ending and then say, okay, now all you students go off and write your own ending. So
Okay.
I was in 7th grade, I believe. And the first one I remember, the first story was I got into this at a drive-in movie theater with these monsters coming after the guy in the car,
Okay.
and I wrote this ending, and then I wrote, and then I woke up.
So it was a
Okay,
dream.
that was my first, it was a dream. And Mrs. Record wrote in red ink, this is a cop-out ending. Never end with a cop-out ending. Never do that. Always take the person where you're going to take them, and don't let them off like, don't say, oh,
Right, because
it didn't
if
really
you just say
happen.
like I woke up from a dream, then you're just like, okay, like then what was the point of the
What was
story?
exactly.
So that's an incredible influence. So would you say that Miss Record was an
I would
influence
say
on you?
that Mrs. Record
Okay.
was a big influence, because then after that, I never wrote a cop-out ending, and I wrote endings, and sometimes I thought they were a little hard, like there was a Twilight Zone story where they're all going into a fallout shelter, and
Okay.
this guy built it, but he only built it for his family, and they're fighting to get in. So my ending was pretty gruesome about,
Okay.
a nuclear. And what Mrs. Record was doing now was she would read the ones that she thought were the best in the class, and my endings always seemed to be among that
That's
group,
awesome.
Which was awesome. Which made me realize, because then when I was younger, I wanted to be a cartoonist. I really can't draw worth of crap.
Okay.
So, but I did make a comic book. But then I realized, no, writing is what I really want. So I would say Rod Serling was my influence. Mrs. Record was a big influence because she taught me a writing exercise I didn't even know about. And I think that's a great exercise for anyone. I think if you're like stumped for writing, I think maybe read a story and then just don't read the end of it and write your own ending.
Or read the end of it and write it, but then also don't tell the writer, oh, you should have ended it like this.
No, never do that.
No, there are people out there that are like, oh, that's a great story, but oh my gosh, I would have done this with it. I would have done that with it. It's like, well, that would be your impetus to say, oh, then you should write something and see what comes out of it,
Another one of my influences as I got older. So I had influences, and then I knew I wanted to be a writer.
Right.
I knew I wanted to write. But I didn't read as much as I should have. I read Edgar Allan Poe was somebody else when I was in
Note
junior
to
high.
everyone watching us: read books, read a lot of
lots
books.
of books. I know you don't want to assimilate the author. If you have a favorite author, you don't want to assimilate them. You don't want to maybe do like there's someone I'm reading right now who puts a word, a period, a word, a period, a word, a period. And that's really nice style. But if I was to do that, then I would consider it that I'm ripping off. I'm not using where some people, there's another writer, Harlan Ellison, that's good for a capital letter sentence
right.
or a one word in capitals.
Or Faulkner, that's good for a whole book of one sentence. Just one sentence, the entire book. No, I'm just kidding.
Kurt Vonnegut is... Kurt Vonnegut will write. He doesn't have paragraphs sometimes.
But the thing is that like if you read more people, and I know Kurt Vonnegut's been a huge influence for you in terms of writing. That that you have, if you read that and say, okay, I like that, or you can read it and say, oh, that doesn't work for me. That's not what I want to do. Or you can just have like one word a page. That's neither here nor there. But it just like influences can be good or bad. Like you can just sit there and say, oh, you loved watching The Twilight Zone, you loved reading Kurt Vonnegut, you loved Edgar Allan Poe, but it could also be you read something and you're like, ooh, never doing that, never making that mistake with writing.
Right, but and the Kurt Vonnegut thing, it's like sometimes it works for you. So
yeah.
It works for Vonnegut where he could have an entire page and it's not a paragraph. There's no break in because a paragraph is supposed to be anywhere from 4 to 6 sentences.
You can make it a little longer.
You can make it longer, but Kurt Vonnegut would have 1 or 2 pages of no indentation, no paragraph. So I had a friend. He sent me a short story he wrote, and
did it influence it on you anyway?
What?
Did it influence you in any way?
It's not that it influenced it. It was like I enjoyed their writing, and some of the people I enjoy their writing made me want to be a writer that much more.
Okay.
And not sometimes there are people that read something. There was an author, a science fiction author that I saw in a group, and he was speaking, and he said that he doesn't read a lot because he feels he can do better. He reads and thinks he could do better. I don't. When I read someone like Kurt Vonnegut, I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
That's really cool. It doesn't work for me, as he said. It doesn't. I wouldn't write a paragraph, 2 pages of a paragraph.
But it worked for Kurt Vonnegut.
But it worked for Vonnegut very well, and I appreciate it. Mm-hmm. I could read it, and I can appreciate what Harlan Ellison does. Ray Bradbury was probably a very big influence because
Have you read all of his books?
As I got older. You've read all of them?
No, have you read all of his books?
I've read a lot of them.
Okay.
I haven't read all of them. I've read a lot. I read like 2 of the novels, a lot of the short stories.
Okay.
I even used to read to Ryan when he was little.
You read Ray Bradbury.
Ray Bradbury.
Ryan's falling asleep to Fahrenheit 451. Sorry, 451.
I don't know if I mentioned I had a lot of books around that. I still do, but now they're in the basement.
How does Ryan sleep at night now? Just out of curiosity.
He sleeps very well. He says the problem is, and I don't remember this, the problem is for many years he was afraid of Chucky. And he claims that Nancy and I kept Chucky on TV. and we
But
wouldn't
Chucky was
take it
always on TV when he was growing up.
He
Like
was-
the,
yeah,
whether
but
whether
that,
yeah.
that scared him. But I would come home, and Ryan was maybe 6 or 7 years old, and he was reading a paperback. And Ryan had a. I'm
Ryan's
going off
his
the
son, by
track.
the way.
My
Ryan, his
son,
son.
Ryan.
Yes,
Yeah.
Benny has this very, very, very wonderful habit of going. I was telling him that he should be an algebra teacher because we were talking about going off on a tangent. He's like going sine, cosine. He's in like the lower left hand side quadrant, and he's like his bell curve is like he's going all the way over
I'm
there.
going
You
for
see that?
symmetry now on the screen. That's what I'm going for, symmetry.
So we have to reel him in. So if you guys want to make comments when you write on Facebook, Benny, come back to
reeling
us.
in.
Benny, come back to us. All right. But that's important though. I think that what comes down to, like with parents, the parental influence is a big. Like, did your parents have an influence on you with your writing?
My mother did more. My father didn't really read anything I wrote,
My dad
But
still
my-
hasn't written my book, but my dad
right.
was there for every single sentence that I wrote. And I'm like, Dad, what word should I use? He goes, that's a great word. Just use,
But my mother did, and unfortunately, my mom never got to really read Last of the Fang-Toothed Bastards, but
Right.
her brother, and a lot of it takes place in Sicily, too. Some of
really?
it.
I didn't know
Well,
that.
It goes to
Yeah,
Europe,
okay.
I go all over.
When Benny sends me this book that he's been writing, I can't wait to read it.
I pulled it out of the mothballs over the weekend. I have all 4 books. The first book, it's in 4 sections. Which
We talked
some
about that, though.
novels-
We already talked
we
about
spoke,
that.
We spoke about that
Benny's
last week.
going to send it to me, but he's on a
Okay.
floppy disk.
Can I tell you the title of each book?
Yes, I would love to
Okay.
hear the title.
First one is Soul of the Phoenix, Heart of the Beast, Shadow of the Sekva, which is Secret Eternal Vampire Hunting Collective, and Wake of the Demon is the
Ooh.
4th one.
But then you said you also have a other book that is kind of like a guide to all of these.
It's in. I wrote the entire guide, but parts of it, segments of it, are in the novel.
Okay.
So segments of that and segments of the journals because there were journals written also.
Okay.
So it starts with the journals, and then some of the Sekva, or whatever the name of their book was that they wrote.
So the said
Sekva, yeah.
Sekva, they wrote a book as well.
Yes, because all of the research they did on different types of vampires.
Right.
They documented all of it. It
So
was chronicled.
if you guys are just joining us tonight, Benny has been writing a book for quite some time.
For a long-
Not forever, but
forever.
For a while.
It became
And
my
so
life's work.
It is his life's work, and eventually I will be getting it hopefully before the end of
And my son
2017.
Ryan's read it, so I gave it to him.
Is
all
Ryan
right,
an
so back
influence
to-
in your life? Like in terms of that he loves movies, he loves all that other stuff. So
Well, he's
Or
my
do you feel
son,
like
and I
you've
love
influenced
him.
his life?
I think I've influenced him.
Okay.
I've influenced him because Ryan is a writer now. Ryan he studied film. He has his degree in television and film, and he's writing. He's writing all the time. So I'm very proud of him. I'm very proud that he's and I made writers should have a good environment. You don't always have a productive environment
yeah,
to
no,
write.
yeah.
So I try. Ryan has. I have a 2-car garage. He's got half that set up as his man cave. So he does writing there.
Oh, that's awesome.
He does writing in his room, and so I tried to because I knew that I didn't always have conducive writing, but
And I think that that's a really good point, that for people that are going out to write and stuff like that, you have to make sure that you are writing in a place that is conducive to writing.
Yes.
You can't just sit there and say, okay, I can write. Like, I have misophonia. So any noise whatsoever, if it's a tapping, if it's any kind of anything, it needs to be absolutely silent.
Oh, okay.
Otherwise, I don't write a single sentence. Like when I was in college, I had to go to the 2nd floor of the library, which nobody went on, to actually study.
Okay, now I do enjoy playing music no words, like classical music,
Okay.
jazz. But when if I start cooking and I'm writing, then when it ends, it ends. I don't get up to change
Right.
the CD and I don't have the radio because I can't listen to people talking.
Yes.
So that I can't listen to, and I can't have anyone ask me questions So in that way, but I will write to. I've written to classical since I was like 17.
Really?
Yes. Beethoven. I had a Best of Beethoven with Ludwig with a rose in his mouth, and on vinyl. And I used to play that, so it was excerpts of like the Ninth Symphony, the Fifth Symphony, and then with I learned a lot. This was an influence for Last of the Fangtooth Bastards.
Okay.
Was Franz Liszt
Yes.
and the Totentanz. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly.
Okay.
The Totentanz, which means in the face of death, everyone is equal. And it's a horror type soundtrack. Dun, 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 dun. So I would play that, and I still own a copy of it. I originally got my first copy at the library,
Right.
because I was getting people I was listening to music. I was checking out artists, Francesca Goya.
Yes.
who
Francesco.
wrote- Francesco.
Yes,
Francesco
Francesco,
Goya,
yes.
who wrote a lot of demonic paint. I mean, his paintings, some of them
Well,
were.
it was also the era in which he was painting as well.
Right.
You're talking about the middle of the 19th century.
But you had
yeah.
like.
Or no, I'm sorry,
you had,
earlier than that.
Like gargoyles over people, and
Yeah.
so he's mentioned in the book, and the Totentanz, because one of my characters loves music.
Okay.
But yeah, I can write to classical and jazz.
So you didn't take into consideration, though, that during that time there was a lot of, as much as people were going on grand tours and stuff like that, that people were still extremely nationalistic in terms of the countries, that with the vampires or whatever, they would be very proud of. If they were Sicilian, they'd be very proud if they were, I don't know where the vampire hunter is from, but
Right.
you didn't take into
They're from
consideration.
England.
Okay, they're from England, so you would have, you didn't take into consideration that maybe they would be very ethnocentric in terms of, no, this composer, this artist is better than a Spanish artist or a German artist.
All right, that would be true, but as I told you, and I hope I'm not going off
No,
the
I'm
track.
just
Okay.
curious because I just feel like
I
that would
told
be
you
more.
The vampire hunters, they were trying to find a cure for what they thought was during the Black Plague, during the bubonic plague, not
Yes.
the black, during the bubonic plague, they were trying to find a cure, and they found these vampires, so thought it was a demonic plague of demons. So they used a little bit of the demon blood, which comes out especially after a demon feeds.
Okay.
They get the blood, and they used a little bit of it in their serum, so it gave them some of the attributes of a vampire as far as immortality.
Okay.
So they had. So you're talking about someone that's 300 years old. They're going to get bored with their own, and some of them had to move, because think of you're going to look the same for 300 years. You're going to look the same.
Yeah, that would
you
be
can't
great.
stay.
Just kidding. I can
would
see
be-
lines already, it's like one gray hair
And it
back
could happen,
here.
and not everybody was young, so it could be some old guy like me, some old mama.
Yeah.
And
No, you get in trouble for turning a child into a vampire.
All right, and I
Did you break that? Did you change that though?
I never read Anne Rice for the one reason that as I told you in the past, there are a lot of vampire stories,
Right.
a lot of them. So I didn't want to copy anybody or lift. I wanted it to be as original as I could, and I researched a lot of the actual in different countries. They're vampires.
Okay.
Which is kind of fascinating if you think of that. For a creature that doesn't exist, every country.
That's what Benny says, guys. Vampires are real.
For a creature that allegedly doesn't exist, every country has their own myth on vampires.
No, absolutely.
And they're all different.
Yeah.
And especially during the bubonic plague, poor thing, they didn't know about comas. So somebody would go into a coma, they'd wake up and they'd kill the guy.
No, do you know that that's why they call it awake?
Oh yeah.
So if someone went into a coma or died, then if they would lay them out, and when they started to learn about that, they would be like, okay, are they going to wake up or whatever? So they would call it awake. Sometimes they would wait for the person to be like, are they really dead? And then they would also, the people that they buried, sometimes because they were dead, they thought they were dead, they would bury them alive. And then
Yeah.
you'd have certain people, like the grave diggers, that would have bells on the graves, the recently
Right.
graves. So you could be able to pull on the string if you weren't really dead, which is
Right.
where the term dead ringer comes from.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so if like you're a dead ringer,
I learned something new.
I'm here to teach
lady
you.
every
I am
time.
here to teach you this.
Uh,
Saved by the Bell is another one.
Say,
Saved by the Bell.
Saved by the Bell, is that too? Yeah, so Saved by the Bell.
Saved by
Not
the
the
Bell.
Zach Morris and Screech or anything
yeah.
show, but Saved by the
by
Bell.
the actual
Thank you,
term.
Bobby.
Thank you, Bobby, for the actual
All right, so
term.
you have all these influences, and so like so you've been writing basically since you were 8 years old.
17,
So you took it more seriously
really,
at 17.
Yeah, took it more seriously. I'd say 16. Well, in high school, so you got to. In high school, I wrote, and
All right, let's skip high school because you wrote, and then
I
when
wrote
did
in
you?
high school. I had
Yeah.
a great teacher who was another. She wasn't really an influence, but she liked my work.
Okay.
And okay, and then I got into reading more. Ray Bradbury, as I said, was a major influence. Some of the books, certain writers, like I didn't want to be like them, but I really loved what they did, and their books had a very good impression on me. And that was, I have to put my glasses on for this, a
The
book
best
that had a
coming
big
back.
impression on me when I was younger. And as I said, I aspired to be a writer then. Flowers for Algernon.
You like that book?
I love that. book.
Really?
I love it. By Daniel Keyes, and you can still find it.
No, I'm sure that they probably still have
Well,
them read it in high school
yeah.
because I read it when I was in high school.
Right, and you're not.
I mean, it was a good story, but I didn't when I'm in school, I didn't like when people were like, here you need to read this, here you need to read that. That to me was just felt like a chore. So for me, my reading was more recreational. Because we're 16 reading Crime and Punishment, which is it's a fantastic story, and it's there's morality in it and stuff like that. But the patience of a 16-year-old is
yes.
not as present as they would be if I were to read it again now.
I agree with that. I agree because in a novel class I had, a college novel class, we had to read Pride and Prejudice.
Yes.
Which is a wonderful book, but when you have to read it, it kind of bored me. I also read Henry Fielding by, it's.
Well, that doesn't matter.
Famous.
Tell us
okay,
what else, yeah.
All right, so no, Flowers for Algernon was a book I really liked, and what I loved about it, and it was like I said, I read something. So he didn't influence me in wanting to write like Daniel Keyes, but it influenced me that how fascinating that this is about someone who is mentally challenged.
Right.
The book is, and it's written in the first person. So what's great is in the first person, you're reading it, and you're reading this person writing a journal, keeping a journal. His punctuation and spelling is not very good because he's not really good, and he becomes a genius.
Yes, exactly. So
he becomes a genius.
But okay, so that was an influence for you.
So that book was amazing to me.
Yes.
I wish if I ever had a short story idea that I could assimilate, do something similar, because a lot of people who write that's something I like too, and I have a first person story like that, but not like that, but some first person stories you could do some amazing things with.
Yeah.
So it's the appreciation of him. I had written the other people who I mentioned Serlinger, mentioned.
What else is on your list?
Now,
What's on your list?
this list is. Let's see. I have more.
Okay,
here we go. Here we go.
Okay.
Richard Matheson, whom I mentioned before.
Yes.
For those of you watching, Richard Matheson also wrote "I Am Legend," which is
we talked about that. We talked about that.
Oscar Wilde.
Yes.
I have several Oscar Wilde books. I have one. I used to collect rare books too. That was like a hobby of mine. I would find.
So, do you think that was a big
influence?
influence for you, or did you collect books because you enjoyed doing that? Did you read the books that you collected?
I read the books I
all
collected. Right. Some of them, if the author was still alive, I would get some of them signed.
No way.
So I have, Harlan Ellison, whom I have over here, and this is an audio book, which is good if you.
Yeah, and don't ever underestimate the power of audiobooks. So say you're driving to work, say you commute a few hours a day, or that you have a job like you have, like as a machinist, to listen to an audiobook
Right.
as you're doing work.
Yeah, or instead of listening to that, to the dumb DJs in the morning, this is a nice way to go to work. Listen.
Yes.
And this one in particular, The Voice from the Edge, Harlan Ellison, he reads it. So not necessarily, and
Which is fantastic.
Which is fantastic. There were other. Okay, Oscar Wilde, essays. See, another thing. As I got older, I appreciated more, and I started writing more of, like write essays, write different. So Oscar Wilde, and you can find some of these authors that you thought only wrote one particular. Isaac Asimov, a science fiction author, wrote textbooks.
I didn't know that.
Yes.
Wow.
And
All
I
right,
read
so who
one on the
else?
brain. Okay. George Orwell.
Yes.
Big influence. His simplistic style is amazing.
Okay.
And George Orwell, I like so much that I kind of wanted to write like him. I didn't
Okay.
want to lift him, but he said a line of George Orwell's that I stick with is, I wrote many stories and essays when I was younger. Fortunately, I threw them all away.
It's
So
it's true.
You don't want people to always read your...
To read your
And-
things that should have been thrown away right
And
away.
if you become very good, if you become a noteworthy author, I don't want to use the word famous. I just want to say if you become
An
like
author of note.
an author of note, you don't want people going around. That happened to Ernest Hemingway when he died. People are going into his desk and looking and...
I mean, people probably did that to Hemingway when he was alive, though, too. You know,
Yeah, but
people
what-
like Hemingway, like really, we talked about places that like where you can write and how you can write and everything else like that. He would go to a cafe and then he'd bitch about all the people that showed up to bother him, and he's just sitting there sipping his Pernod and, just trying to write something. And then, here comes Scott, here comes Zelda, here comes,
Right.
Gertrude. And he had relationships with them, but at the same time,
Yeah, he loved them, but he loathed them.
yeah.
You love and love, and that's,
Which is probably how you feel about most people in your life.
I'm like that. I love being. Sometimes someone will say, "Why did you say that about that person?" I'm like, "I love them, I do," but and they feel the same way about me. Trust me. Okay, Dorothy Parker,
Okay.
the acid tongue queen, right?
Yes.
She, Dorothy. Also, Susan Sontag, who was also.
Yes. As an
great
art
as an
historian,
essay.
Susan Sontag is near and dear to my heart. I think I just consumed every single one of her
Oh,
books.
you did? Okay.
Yeah, no, I mean, you read on photography. Actually, I posted something today about how I didn't love photography until I took this one photograph. And I took this one photograph. But before that, I mean, I studied photography. I love photography. And I think that Susan Sontag, for me, is a huge influence because here is this woman who, knows that she wants to be a scholar, knows that she wants to be an academic, and just goes out and goes to Paris. So go back to Hemingway and everything.
Yeah.
And then she just talks to everybody and meets everyone and just knows that these people are going to have an impact on her life, and she never fights against it. Like, to me, Susan Sontag is a very admirable woman because she never rages against her gift.
Right.
She never like turns her back to it. It's there for her, and she just pursues it.
Great. She's not on the list, but I had to say it because I was going over when I wrote the list. I was like, I don't have enough, women authors on there, and I know I read a lot of women. And then I was like, oh, Susan Sontag, because I go to the library. I got
Which do you love about her?
AIDS and Its Metaphors,
Yes.
and a couple of books on essays, which was a long time ago now. But
I mean, she's been
most of
passed
her-
away
most
now
of
for
the-
what, like over almost 20 years, right? Longer
is
than
it
that?
that long?
I think it's no, maybe less. No, I'm sorry. That's not true.
I don't remember.
She wrote an essay. No, it's been shorter than that. It's been a
Yeah.
decade. Never mind. It hasn't
Maybe
been 20
a
years
decade.
because I
Might have
remember one
been.
of her last essays
Great,
was on September
great
11th.
writer. Yeah, wrote great essays. And she was in like a Woody Allen movie as one of those talking heads, like they're talking about a character.
Yeah.
And they have Susan Sontag there, and she was talking about a fictitious character, but acted like in Zelig, the Woody Allen movie Zelig.
I haven't really. I don't watch television. I don't
Yeah,
watch
you don't watch
movies.
movies.
I don't.
Woody
I
Allen
know.
also, though, Woody Allen's one of those rare filmmakers who also has published short stories and books.
Yes.
So he's one of those rare, and actually published. He's a big science fiction fan.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and I read a few of his, but he's not on. Early influence, and this guy was a big Michael Crichton.
Really?
Yes,
Would you
Michael
watch
Crichton.
Jurassic Park read Jurassic Park and just?
I read both of them, and I'll be honest with you, I like The Lost World, the book, much better than the movie. They're very different.
Aren't they coming out with another Jurassic Park like this week?
Yeah, Jurassic World now. They're into.
I forget what it
Back
was.
to reboot. What we talked about reboot.
Yeah,
And
so I remember being at my aunt's house one day, and I picked up Jurassic Park. Like, I had it with me, but we went to my aunt's house, and everybody was playing outside, and I'm sitting in the back seat of my parents' car just reading Jurassic
did
Park.
you like it?
I was like 11, 12 years old. Of course I liked it. Like I like my grandpa used to yell at me because I was reading books in the car with the light on and everything. He's like, "You're gonna kill the battery." I'm like, sorry.
Crichton is up there with the authors that I read the most of.
Okay.
I would say because Andromeda Strain, The Terminal Man was the second one. Sphere, I read both Jurassic Parks. The Eaters of the Dead.
He's a good storyteller, though. He tells a good story.
He's good, but Congo, the movie was kind of a bomb.
Really, I loved Congo. Are you kidding
did? You
me?
like the
Yeah.
movie? The book is great.
Okay.
The book is great, but it's
Not Bill Pullman? Who is that? That's in it.
I don't remember, and Ernie Hudson is in it.
Okay.
Ernie Hudson from Ghostbuster.
Yes,
fame.
yes.
Yeah, he's the.
All right, so
he's the
Michael Crichton.
explorer.
Who else?
Michael Crichton. Mario Puzo.
Okay, you talked about him before.
Yes, I love
Who else?
Mario
And your English
Puzo.
teachers.
My English teachers, Mrs. Reckett, Mrs. Rosenbaum, and I just thought of someone else. Frank, I'd have to put, not that he wasn't an influence, but I mean, so there are influences and there are writers that you really like, but and I read all of Frank Herbert's Dune books.
Yes.
And Frank
My
Herbert's
friend
short
made fun of
stories.
me for reading Dune one day.
Yeah?
Yeah. Steven, we're going to talk about this right here. I was reading it. He texted me and he's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm reading Dune." And he's like, "Who reads Dune?" I'm like, "Everyone reads Dune. Dune is an amazing book."
The fun thing about reading Dune is when you meet someone who's read them, and if they read all 6 of them.
I didn't know. I only
Oh,
read
yeah.
the first
Oh, you
one, but I
only read
want to
the
read the
first
rest
one.
of them. But I thought it was such a wonderful, I thought it was a really well-crafted book, a good story, and it was also intelligent. And that's what gets me. If I read a book and there's intelligence to it, if I read a book that has pseudo-intelligence, like The Martian to me was one of those books. I'm like, I get it. You can use these big words, but it wasn't anything that it wasn't. But when you read a book and you can interlace, social constructs into something that's science fiction, that to me was a fantastic story.
And I've always described Dune as Star Wars with intelligence.
That's what, yeah, exactly,
It
exactly.
is Star, because you were saying it's Star Wars with intelligence. And if you get into Dune, you will see a lot of similarities
Yeah.
with Star. There are some that we can't give away. There are some heavy-duty similarities. And I read a book about the making of the first Dune.
All right, but that doesn't matter.
That's not my, all right.
Guys, we're gonna reel him
All
back
right.
in once again. I'm sorry that I'm abrupt about it.
No,
but,
that's good, though.
But we
Okay.
gotta
All right.
go with it.
So that's my influences. Now we're going to talk about, we have like 20 minutes. We're going to talk about inspiration.
Yes.
Okay, we'll talk about it. And I will bring in some of the influences because some of these people that I mentioned, I never got to meet Richard Matheson. I met Ray Bradbury, met Harlan Ellison. I met a few others. There was when I used to go to this convention in Stony Brook, a science fiction, it was called
Okay.
the Icon. And they were more writer-oriented, so it's not like your Comic-Con. They had authors and they had panel groups. So I got to see some great authors.
That's really
So,
cool.
yeah,
But they
comic
don't
book
do that
authors.
anymore.
No, they stopped doing it. I don't know. It was no longer economically feasible because more people are into going to the movies and the role play and stuff.
Yeah.
Where here it was books and they had some films.
Well, it was also
But a lot
before
of-
Instagram, so it's before you going over to the
Yeah.
Comic-Con, taking a picture, and then
Right, there was
walking
none of
away.
that. You didn't-
No, but I mean, there's so many people out there that
I don't
just
have pictures
love.
of it, yeah.
Yeah, but like you said, like you have that, and there's so many people that love Comic-Con. Like the comics mean something to people. Comics, like they're a huge influence in their lives because sometimes for people, especially not saying all depressive sorts, but like people that find solace in books and comics and stories of the underdog, really saving the day or winning big in life, and just but they have a alternate personality, like an alter ego, so I think that's a beautiful thing about it.
And this was a great convention because you would get not all celebrity writers. There were writers that were making a living out of it and telling you about sometimes the publisher wants to make big changes in your work.
Yeah.
And the money isn't always there.
No, there's probably no money in writing.
Because there was a Locust magazine at the time.
All right. So anyway, so let's talk about influence.
Okay,
I mean, inspiration.
Inspiration. One more influence, though. I mentioned Twilight Zone. They used to have a magazine.
Yes.
That Rod Serling's wife. I own almost every issue.
Okay.
And I learned more about writers because they would interview authors. I would see the authors. So when I went to the Stony Brook and I would meet these authors, there were a lot of panel groups, and they would talk about inspiration. And Harlan Ellison had said something I said to you before. Harlan Ellison was there a lot, and I met him there, have probably close to 20 books of his signed.
Right.
And Ellison said that a lot of people would go up to him and ask, where do you get your ideas from? And he said, if you want to be a writer, that should be a question you should never ask.
Yeah.
If you ask that question, you're never going to get it. You know?
But I think that there's also inspiration as well. You know, like I know that I write children's books. Like you read it yesterday. You read my children's book that I wrote the other day. Like that's on like sometimes like we talked about, like it's just a conversation. Sometimes, you know, it's not inspiration. Like everything should inspire you.
It was inspired by a conversation, right?
But everything should inspire you. Like so you shouldn't go outside of your house and be like, okay, today I want to be inspired by this, or today I want to be inspired by that. Everything should be inspiration. Like the way the sun is shining through the trees, or the way the you know, the way the wind feels when you first step outside.
The inspiration should find you, more or less.
That's bullshit.
Sometimes. Yeah, you think so?
No, I think that's a cop-out. That's a cop-out ending that you're talking about. Because the inspiration should not find you.
Sometimes something happens.
But that's not inspiration finding you. That's your life unfolding as it is.
All right, okay. No, because I was thinking of, like, you know, something happens. So one of those mass shootings that happened has inspired me to write something against it.
Right.
You know, a story. So, you know, or I drove through the Everglades many years ago. Right. And that inspired me for a story because at that time there was a lot of cocaine trafficking.
There's still a lot of cocaine
trafficking.
There,
I guess. I don't know. My nose can't handle that. So.
But yeah, so inspiration, I don't think that it's just like you wait for those things to happen, though. They just are happening in the world around you. And so you pick and choose which, you know, if it's going to inspire you, if it's not.
And and then you pick and choose, so you get inspired, and you're like, wow, I could write a short story about I have a cell phone that sucks me into it.
Yeah.
And I could be Google. I can actually go into different
and
things.
You can absolutely, yeah.
Or, you know, time travel or whatever. But now I'm going to evaluate, is this story really worth writing?
And that's what you have to do. Like when you sit there and say, okay, like, you know, you can sit on so many books and say, do I want to tell this story? Do I not want to tell the story? Do I want to just leave it in the realm and maybe someone else will be inspired in a similar way and write a similar book or write something different with what they were inspired by as well?
Right, and that's something you mentioned in a previous show, which is so true of if you have the ideas, you should write them right away because they're not exclusive to you, these ideas.
No.
Other people get these ideas and they're not going to tell it the same way you did.
No. Because there's so many different writers out there too, and I think that's where the inspiration is as well, is that, like, you know, we talked about influences and stuff like that, and they can also serve it as an inspiration. You know, like they can, you know, you read Susan Sontag and you read about what she has to say about anything. She talks about trauma, she talks about atrocity, she talks about war, she talks about life, she talks about politics, everything.
I want to read her again now because it's been so long.
I have all of her books. I can bring them into next week.
Because I had, like I said, I had to mention her because she was a fabulous writer. And I really I used to go to the library and take her stuff out. I never owned any. You know, I used to, and I'm surprised I don't.
Yeah.
Because usually, you know, like I have a Dorothy Parker. I have the portable
you need
Dorothy
more female
Parker.
writers. I know you have mine, but
yes.
yeah, no, sometimes I look at my bookshelf and I'm like, man, you know, I don't have as many female writers as I'd like as well. But I find that when I read female writers, I connect with them so much more than male writers, except for Tom Robbins, because I am.
Yeah, you love Tom Robbins.
No, I am madly in love with Tom Robbins. It's not just a love. It's a. One of my friends, I told you this, one of my friends when I was in college, she's like, here,
it's in the
read
book.
this. Yeah.
It's in the,
so
it's
Tom
in
Robbins
Mosaic.
to me was Tom Robbins to me is the epitome of what a writer is. He's smart, he's sexy, he's funny. He's not only smart, but he's brilliant. There's a brilliance behind him. So,
Right. Yeah.
you know, and you have all these, like, you have all these elements, and not only that, him as an intriguing individual, but he puts that intrigue into all the characters that he writes about. So it's like, you know, there's I would think that with like fiction and nonfiction and or any kind of writing, real life, there's that blurred line between reality and not reality.
Yeah.
You know, so you
Where
can read,
sometimes you're like, did this really happen?
like you can read Ray Bradbury, or you can read. I know you you also mentioned oh my gosh, why am I blanking out on his name? You love him. He wrote The Cat's Cradle.
Kurt Vonnegut.
Yeah, Kurt Vonnegut. You know, you talk about him, and he just skates that line all the time. You know, he's he's looking out the window, and he's talking about a scene. In the meantime, like there's aliens coming. You know,
Right,
so it's just that idea
They're
of
a bizarre alien.
exactly.
And
So you can take the bizarre and make it ordinary, make the ordinary make it bizarre.
And Kurt Vonnegut is probably, you would call him your most mainstream science fiction writer.
I would say Isaac Asimov is a big, huge.
But when you read, if you tell somebody Vonnegut, they're like, oh, Vonnegut. They don't think of him as science fiction. But I don't think people do.
I would think that they would. Absolutely.
I don't know.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah.
I think about him as science fiction.
I do too.
But I just think that I don't read science fiction as often as I should. I love sci-fi books, but
Yeah.
it's just a matter of, you know, when you read one sci-fi book and people like, you go down the rabbit hole with the people that love sci-fi, and then they bring up this book and they bring up that book, and you're just like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't know. I wish I knew, but I have no idea.
I know, and I had read a lot, and then there's some. Nancy Kress. I never read. Nancy Kress is a very good science fiction
Okay,
author.
but we're not talking about science fiction. We're talking about
All right,
inspiration now.
Beggars from Spain, and just letting you know. Okay, so inspiration. All right, can I get into how I was inspired? Did I tell you how I was inspired?
No, that's what we actually.
Okay.
That was the point of the show. Actually, was to talk about Benny today, which is what we've done, and what inspired him, what influenced him. So what?
I shared an apartment with a friend of mine who was a professional stand-up comedian, a headliner, and he had done some television, and he would travel all over the country performing. And I was a resort bartender, so I was going from Florida, and I went to Fire Island. So our home base was the apartment.
Okay.
And we were going.
And where was this apartment?
Apartment was in Islip, Long
Okay.
Island. Okay, and I had more books than him, and he had more T-shirts than me. So he would steal my books, and I would steal his T-shirts. It kind of
I
worked
feel like
out.
that's not a fair trade. If they were hooded
no, they were
sweatshirts,
good.
it'd be
They were like T-shirts from like off the set of Cheers and stuff.
Oh,
like
okay.
that. Yeah.
I was gonna say if they're hooded sweatshirts, then that would be amazing. But or scarves, but.
And he would take because we had mentioned on the show in the past, sometimes you buy the book and it stays on your shelf for a while till you're ready to.
Yeah, but if someone stole my book, I would come after them.
He usually,
Like I let a
we
friend
were like
in Georgia.
brothers. We were like brothers.
But I let a friend in Georgia like borrow a book of mine. Is Bill Bryson's Short History of Nearly Everything.
Yeah.
Never got it back from him. Still upset about it 5 years later. No, I mean obviously I can buy it again, but like it just.
I'm upset about some books too that I've lent to people, or I don't know what happened to them.
Yeah, Rainey, if you're watching also, you still have my On the Road, and I'm fairly certain that every single line in that book is underlined, because I read it when I was 19 years old. So, like, everything was like, Jack Kerouac to me was a god.
Yeah.
Didn't you feel like well, you must have read it contemporary. You must have been contemporary with Jack Kerouac.
Believe it or not, no. I have to tell. I started reading it, and
Actually,
I don't know
that's
what
a lie.
happened.
You were definitely a lot
on the
younger
road.
than
What?
Jack. You were definitely a lot younger than Jack Kerouac.
Yeah, I am. But
I'm so
but
sorry.
no, but my buddy who we shared the apartment with, he was big. He got so big into Kerouac and the Beat generation that he did a tour called the Dig Tour.
Okay.
And he was trying to do
Is he
like
like, do
the
you
hip-
dig? Do you
the
dig?
you dig, but it didn't really go over. Then they turned it into, he got a drummer and they turned it into a Vegas act.
Okay.
Like a fake Vegas act.
Okay.
Pseudo. So anyway, my friend, he tells me he's off to go off on the road. I had just come in. I was going to be on Long Island for a day or two. And he says, Fright Night, go, the original Fright Night. He says, a great vampire movie. You have to watch Fright Night.
Okay.
So I'm like, fine. I watch it. And halfway through it, it's a vampire clone. It's a Count Dracula clone of this guy who falls in love with this woman who reminds him of a woman he was in love with hundreds of years ago. And I said, oh my God. I said, and the idea popped in my head, what if there was a vampire hunter who was immortal?
Mm-hmm.
And he had to be subjected to this vampire bullshit that's going on, and he was
Let's be clear, there's no such thing as vampire bullshit.
but he had to be subjected to all the different, because there's all different forms of vampire in the media and television. There's comedy. So I thought, what if this poor vampire hunter was the last of his kind? He was the last of, so they're not entirely immortal. They could die. It's very, very painful to die, though.
Like regular vampires, it's very painful to die as well.
But not the stake in the heart. He would have to go into like a meat grinder or something,
That's gruesome.
Yeah, or
You're a gruesome man.
Somebody cut and try to bleed out or whatever, because he's been alive for 300 years. All the other people, they couldn't take it anymore.
Okay.
So they're gone.
But do you get to
he's the
choose to be a
last one.
vampire hunter, or is it chosen for you?
It happened from the. It happened. They didn't realize that the serum. They gave this. They made the serum.
Okay.
And then they were. The vampires found out about it. And one night, which here's a scene I wrote, and it's copyright. It has a copyright. For Tim Burton's used the scene where you're looking out at the cloud and it turns into a bunch of bats.
Yes.
I wrote that scene a long time ago, and it was they're looking at that. There was a full moon. All of a sudden, there's no moon, and they realize the dark cloud is a bunch of bats attack them as they're celebrating their cure.
Okay.
They're celebrating it, so they get attacked, and so as they're taking care of the wounded, after they get rid of them, they're taking care of the wounded. They find out some of them are healing.
Okay.
They never expected that. They didn't realize that. So then, it was. I can't think of the proper word, but I don't want to say inadvertent. It's like they never expected to be immortal. They were just fighting a cure. We have 2 minutes.
All right. So basically, so you went to go watch Fright Night. So this is where we need to come back to where you need to come back to this.
And so I thought, this poor vampire hunter can't wait to kill the last fang-toothed bastard so that he can rest.
And the story is born.
And then it developed into this, and an influence for the story. I didn't. It was Richard Matheson. We could bring it back. Richard Matheson wrote "I Am Legend," which, for those of you who only are familiar with the Will Smith version, or "I Am Legend" is a vampire story. He's the last. He's a vampire hunter.
Yes.
And
we talked about this.
And everyone else is a vampire. And I didn't realize when I wrote the story, then I found an old copy of I Am Legend and said, I'll be damned. But it's a different, he doesn't, he's not immortal, Robert Neville.
Okay.
But he's just not a vampire.
Yeah.
So
basically what it comes down to is that you can take an awful situation or a wonderful situation and it can inspire you to write a book or write a short story or a joke or anything.
Right.
So anything that happens in your life, you can turn into any form of writing. Great.
I had a lot of fun. I thank you all for watching. We'll get to your comments. And I don't know what I had something on the tip of my tongue, but we will talk more about next week. We'll have new topics.
Yes.
We finally covered influences. Right?
Almost. I would say we covered your influences, absolutely.
Yeah,
but we got to go back to no, it's fine. I don't need to talk about my influence. No, just kidding. Right. But influences and inspiration, more inspiration to come.
Yes.
Hopefully, we're inspiring you as well.
Yeah, I hope so. And go to your public library.
Yes.
Support your library.
Absolutely. And buy my book.
And buy this. This is a wonderful book. Mosaic. Okay, go on to Write to Speak fan page on Facebook, and you'll see the book. You could go on Amazon.com. There it is. It's coming up. Take care, everybody. Have a great week.
Yes, have a good week, guys.
Thanks for watching.